Out of all the game series that I've become a fan of in recent years, none of them hold a candle to how much I have fallen in love with the Fire Emblem series. No other series has given me so many hours of joy and entertainment, be it a fantastically done story and characters, the simple yet deep combat system, brilliant level design, and just overall polish and quality within each game in the series. It's no wonder that these are some of my favourite RPGs, nay, games of all time. The one aspect about the Fire Emblem series that sticks out most is, of course, the characters. Since the games are built around building supports between them and how they affect certain events or attributes during the gameplay or even story, and this video is all about them. Sort of. More specifically, the classes. In Fire Emblem, you control a group of soldiers / mercenaries, with each one being a different class with certain skills and attributes that reflect their type of character, and knowing how to use them effectively is the key to victory. Each class has their strengths and weaknesses, and we've got a countdown here to see which ones make the cut. Now, first of all, let's set some ground rules. Firstly, I'm only including classes that have appeared in more than one Fire Emblem game, since certain games have specific classes for certain characters, usually making them a one-of-a-kind class and often overpowered. Secondly, I'm looking at all the classes in both their normal state and their upgraded state, so if I were to discuss Cavaliers, I would also discuss either Paladins or Great Knights to go alongside that. Thirdly, during the countdown I will be talking about who I think is the best character from a particular class. Also, for those who've played Fire Emblem Awakening, I'm not counting the second seal system because it doesn't affect the character in the story, just the gameplay. Finally, I'm not including Lords on this list since most of the time they're the main character and they're usually the strongest class in the game, which feels like unfair competition when compared to the other classes. And just a side note, since I haven't played the Japanese exclusive Fire Emblem games and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, why are you so damn hard to find? I'm only looking at Fire Emblem 7, Sacred Stones, Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, and Awakening. And with that cleared up, prepare your weapons and ready your steed, as together we ride to victory! Let's start things off with a class that should really be in more games, the Halvard Air. Out of all the classes in Fire Emblem, I'm surprised that this one hasn't made more appearances in other Fire Emblem games. The Halvard Air is a class exclusive to both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, and is an upgraded version of the Soldier class. With this in mind, you'd think this would be a class you'd get early on in every Fire Emblem game, but sadly that isn't the case. Soldiers and Halvardiers are very well-rounded classes with a strong level of attack and defense, not to mention good speed and skill, meaning they can dish out quite a bit of punishment and take it as well. More often than not, Halvardiers tend to be that one class you don't care for initially, but they always seem to perform miracles at the last possible moment, either dealing massive amounts of damage towards the enemy, or sometimes being able to hold down and block an opening for quite some time, and they're very useful when dealing with both mercenaries, especially thieves. Halvardiers unfortunately aren't one of those classes that can absolutely dominate certain situations, since there's nothing they're super effective against, but at the same time, there's nothing that can absolutely destroy them either, for the most part. As for my favourite Halvardier, there's no competition. It's Nafini. Like with my opinions on Halvardiers in general, Nafini was a character I didn't really notice at first. I mean, she wasn't bad or anything, she just didn't stand out much. But the more I played through Path of Radiance, the more I began to notice just how useful she was. And it wasn't until Radiant Dawn, however, that she really began to shine, and became one of the best characters in the game. I also found her character to be very interesting. She's a simple country girl who comes alive in battle, as it is her way of dealing with her confidence issues, as her armor both hides her physically and mentally, and tries to keep herself concealed from others. While not particularly amazing, Halvardiers are very reliable and well-rounded classes, and should really be in more Fire Emblem games. Hint, hint, Nintendo. They say to fully understand something is to master it. In this case, one must first master the way of the sword before becoming a sword master. Yeah, obvious foreshadowing aside, Swordmasters really are something special. Both them and Myrmidons have really high levels of speed and skill. Not to mention, their chances of getting critical hits are abnormally high. Swordmasters can deal massive amounts of damage and dodge attacks from almost all enemies. You think I'm kidding here? If there's a large group of enemies wielding axes, and you send in one Swordmaster, none of them have a chance in hell of landing a single hit unless they're using a Sword Reaver. Another great thing about Swordmasters and Myrmidons is that because of their high chance of critical hits, equipping one with a killing edge pretty much guarantees death for any opponent that crosses them. With all this fearsome attacking power though, Swordmasters aren't the best class defensively, since they often have low health and they can die within 1 or 2 hits from a decent level class, provided that they hit you of course. Also, Swordmasters and Myrmidons tend to be only useful in levels with a lot of axe wielding units, and or if you happen to give them some sort of special weapon like a killing edge or a silver sword, which doesn't exactly make them the most reliable of classes. When it comes to my favourite Swordmaster, it was actually a rather difficult decision, since Sacred Stones had the smooth talking gambler Joshua, and Path of Radiance had the proud and honourable Zira, but I had to give it to Long Ku from Awakening. One of the more interesting characters in the game, Long Ku, despite being one of the best mercenaries, is terrified of women. For the most part, he can't even stand to be in the same room as them. This little quirk of his is actually expanded upon during his support conversations, where he explained that he was once in love with someone, but after she died, he didn't want to go through that type of pain and suffering again, which really shows how complex of a character he is. On the gameplay front, Long Ku was one of the units that I always took into battle with me, as he always proved through in taking down any foe that crossed his path. And after he learned Astra, nothing could stand before him. Literally. While more situational than most classes, Swordmasters and Myrmidons can be very useful when used effectively, but it's the lack of reliability that prevents them from getting any higher than number 9. In a game where armies of soldiers are at each other's throats with swords, spears, axes and bows, you need a little bit of magic to spice things up. One of the more versatile classes in the game, mages are necessary for just about any situation in the entire game. No matter what the enemy or type of field, mages will always be useful, and can cover quite a lot of areas of combat, being able to use different types of tomes ranging from wind, fire and thunder, to using magic that can hit enemies from over 10 squares away, and even being able to use staffs when they become sages. Mages can pretty much do everything. Now in certain games there are mages that specialise in certain types of magic, like having either fire or lightning mages, but for the most part mages in Fire Emblem can cover all areas of magic, except dark. Mages, especially those with good stats, are usually seen at the front lines most of the time, so they can offer massive output towards the objective and support other classes. Though these guys aren't exactly perfect, since despite their potency, if an enemy has high enough resistance stats, mages aren't exactly the best to use. Not to mention they have incredibly low defense, meaning a single hit from a strong enough class can instantly kill a mage. When it comes to the best mages, there are a lot to choose from, as you tend to get a large number of mages throughout the game, but I'd have to say that Ileana from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn is my best. One of the more controversial choices for this list. I know a lot of people like either Seren and Micaiah, but I don't know, I've always liked Ileana the best. During my playthrough of Path of Radiance, she was one of the strongest classes in the game, being able to pick off enemies without any kind of fuss. And though while not as good in Radiant Dawn, she was still useful, especially against Wyvern Riders. Also, I really liked her relationship with Zero, as she learned not to just take people for granted, but rather really appreciate them what they did for her. Not to mention her constant need to eat wherever she could. I just found that to be adorable. In the end, no matter what armies you may face or terrain you may cover, mages will always be a reliable source of victory. One of the traditions with any Fire Emblem game is to start with an advanced unit, so that if something goes wrong, you have someone who can take care of the harder enemies at a moment's notice. And for most of the games, you tend to start with a Paladin. More popular classes in the Fire Emblem series, Paladins are usually a class that is given to you at the beginning of the game, and it's pretty clear why. Thanks to their high movement, strength and speed, Paladins are able to take care of most if not all classes, and they can move across the battlefield with ease, taking out harder to reach units without any kind of fuss. That's not to say Cavaliers aren't useful too, no, far from it. While more like soldiers in terms of overall consistency with their stats, Cavaliers' high movement and speed make them great for hit and run tactics, as well as rescuing other units and capturing bases or objectives. Another great thing about these units are that in most cases, you tend to get a high number of Cavaliers throughout the course of the game, meaning you can have a lot of Paladins at your disposal to wreak havoc on the opposing team. As for the best Paladin, I'm going to have to go with the first Paladin I ever had, and by far my favourite, Seth. Finally, the first plot important character on this list. Seth played a big part in Fire Emblem and Sacred Stones. Being Erica's personal knight, Seth was responsible for rescuing Erica during the war with the Greater Empire and aiding both her and Ephraim in taking back the country of Rennes. From there, he went by Erika's side to help destroy the Demon King and return peace to the world. On the gameplay front, Seth was by far one of the most useful units in the game, as he could take on anyone early game and was still useful till the end of the game. He was someone I could always rely on, and his support conversations with Erika were just beautiful. Seeing his devotion and love for her during their support conversations were some of the best moments in Sacred Stones. While they're not always the advanced class you get in the beginning of every Fire Emblem game, Paladins will always be one of the most reliable units in the game. What's better than flying Pegasus Knights? Flying Dragon Knights, of course! By far one of the strongest units in the game, Dragon Knights and Wyverns are flying units like the Pegasus Knight, but instead of using speed and resistance, Dragon Knights use brute force and strong defense to decimate their prey without any kind of fuss. This makes them perfect for taking down hard to reach units or even making quick kills. Unlike other fast moving units, they can also be used to help rescue others and capturing objectives. Thanks to their high level of defense, they're also capable of standing against archers, which in most cases can kill a flying unit in a single shot. With all the fearsome attributes at the helm, Wyvernlords aren't an exception to the low points, however. But what's the worst thing about Wyvernlords? Even considering the stats when compared to the other classes, Wyvernlords have absolutely terrible resistance, making them useless against any decent number of mages. Not to mention their low level of evasiveness means that they won't be dodging hits anytime soon, so they're not the best to be left against any number of really powerful units. Also, you tend to get only 1 or 2 Wyvern Knights throughout most of the game, so you really can't afford to lose them unless you like those who die in your game stay dead, you monster! When it comes to the best Wyvern Knight, that's actually a really tough choice since there are a lot of Wyvern Knights I've used, and all of them have been awesome. Do I pick Cormac for his power and strength? How about CRASHX for her grace and wisdom? Or do I go with Har for his general awesomeness despite his tendency to be lazy? Or what about Jerome, or as I like to call him, Batman? But when push comes to shove, I'm going to go with Jill from Path of Radiance. Another character who changed a lot during the course of the game, Jill was originally a Daean soldier who had an extreme hatred for the Lagoon and was completely blinded by arrogance. But after she joined the Grail Mercenaries, she soon began to learn more about the Lagoons and respect them, and she saw that she was wrong about them, as well as understanding that her home country of Daemon had to be defeated in order to end the war. This made her one of the deeper characters in Path of Radiance, and she had to deal with fighting against her own people and working with a species she initially hated. Jill was very good on the battlefield as well, so she was great from getting from point A to point B very quickly and could deal with the more pesky enemies that would give my team a lot of trouble. And that was before I gave her the skill vantage, which turned her from a one-hit wonder to a complete and utter beast. And even in Radiant Dawn, she was still awesome. Despite their glaring weaknesses, Wyvernlords are some of my favourite units in the game and can completely dominate the map if the conditions are set right. So we've got Horse Riders, Dragon Riders, Pegasus Riders, and Mages. What else could we add to this fantasy RPG? How about Beastmen? Give that man a promotion! Well, it wouldn't be a fantasy game without some sort of shape-shifting entity, would it now? Now this type of class goes by many names depending on the game, but I'm most familiar with the Lagoons and the Manichetes, so I'll refer to them as such. This class operates different from most classes as they don't use traditional methods of attack and movement, since their ability to transform into different types of creatures changes what they can do, ranging from lions to eagles to ravens and even dragons. Yes, that's right, dragons! Once transformed, these units become some of the most powerful characters in the entire game, being able to dish out devastating amounts of damage, as well as having character-specific abilities depending on what they transform into. This makes them incredibly useful as they can easily turn the tide of battle in mere seconds. It's also noteworthy that in most Fire Emblem games, Lagoons tend to be a central part of the storyline, especially in games like Path of Radiance, which leads to a lot of interesting lore and mythology behind them, allowing for deep characters and a very rich story. There is one thing that hurts this class, but it's quite a big thing. Because of how the class is designed, their transformations are limited to only a few turns before they revert back to their normal states, or in Awakening's case, until the stones run out. Because of this, they're not the most reliable class since they're not too consistent with their transformations and can easily go from powerhouses to power mouses. Sorry, that's a pain. when it comes to my favourite, I was originally going to go with Tibon since he's insanely powerful, is the king of the horse, a critical character in the story, one of the best units in the game, and, well, just look at those abs, I mean, damn! But looking back, it pretty much comes down to the whole Lord class thing, making it unfair for the other Legoose units in the story, so sorry big guy, maybe next time. Now for my other favourite, that's going to have to be Naui from Awakening. Now, don't go jumping to any conclusions and don't be fooled by appearances. Naui may look cute and cuddly, and well, she is, but she's also a vital asset to my team's efforts. While it did take a while for her to get to the right level so she could actually be useful, once I reached that point, Naui became one of the best tanks on my team, being able to take so many hits and dish out so much pain too. I also never had to worry about her transformation limit since I never ran out of dragons, so thank you traveling merchants, you and your awesomely rare discounted items, you! Naui was a great character in Awakening as well. While not the most deep and complex character, she was a very fun character with a childlike and naive nature despite being over 1,000 years old, and just some very strong support conversations, delving into how she likes to keep people happy and is afraid of being left alone just like she was as a child. Despite being the most situational class in the series, Legoose and Manichetes are some of the coolest and best classes you have on your team. With the sheer variety between units, Tibon, the massive amounts of damage and defense, Tibon, being able to transform them specific abilities, Tibon, As mentioned earlier, mages are some of the most versatile and useful classes in the game. Dare I say, they're rather majestic. Well, what if you took the same concept but focused more on the stronger magical stats and tomes that cause additional effects on the enemy, and having the entire premise based more on death and necromancy? Oh yeah, it's Dark Mages, baby! I bet you're all thinking, dude, you already put Mages on this countdown, and Dark Mages is just the same variant, completely different class, right? Wrong! Yes, Dark Mages are very similar to Mages in terms of stats and abilities, but there's a lot more to these guys than meets the eye. Dark Mages are like the berserkers of the Mage class, which they focus a lot more on dishing out as much pain as possible, slowly draining the enemy's life until there's none left. Dark Mages, aside from being able to use regular tomes, have access to Dark Magic tomes, which is one of the most potent and powerful tomes in any Fire Emblem game. Spells like Nosferatu, Ruin, Eclipse, and Glenifir, just to name a few. Not only do they have massive amounts of damage output, but they also tend to have additional effects such as health draining, very high critical hit, petrification, and so on. This makes Dark Mages vital against difficult enemies and even bosses to an extent. Also, because of their high levels of resistance, they're great for taking out normal mages too. Dark Mages are all that, a bag of chips, a kitchen sink, they're just awesome! Though Dark Mages do have a slight downside. As I mentioned, Dark Mages are much more potent when it comes to magical stats, but their base stats are pretty damn poor when compared to the other classes, which means that they don't tend to do well against non-magic classes. Also, the usefulness of a Dark Mage depends on the term you give it, since it's unlikely for a Dark Mage to be highly evasive or take a lot of hits. So if that particular Dark Mage doesn't have the right tone, they're not going to last long. When it comes to who I think is the best Dark Mage, there's no competition. It's Faja from Awakening. Yeah, it seems like the more obvious choice, but can you blame me? Not only is Faja one of the best units in the game on the battlefield, but she's also one of the most entertaining characters in the game, not to mention being the most popular characters in the Fire Emblem series, for more than obvious reasons. But on a more serious note, Faja really is something special. Gameplay-wise, Faja's skills and abilities are some of the best in the game, so she can easily dish out huge amounts of damage with her turns, and thanks to her ability Vengeance, she can increase her attack by half of the damage she's dealt. This made her perfect when combined with Nosferatu, as she could do massive damage to the enemy and keep on gaining back health. In fact, in some ways, I would just let Faja be at the center of the battlefield and let the enemies just attack as they could walk to their doom without any risk to Faja herself. Her character is a ton of fun too. Faja has this very sadistic and twisted personality, constantly feeling the need to hex people and being very cold around nearly all the other characters. Faja's mostly seen as the loner of the group. That is until you bring Robin into the equation, when then she suddenly turns to a highly obsessive stalker, watching your every move like she's Gollum and you're her precious. I also like the relationship with her daughter. She's able to learn what she was like in the future, and how she used Nori as more of an experiment rather than acting like an actual mother, and quickly learns to love her daughter rather than risk putting her daughter through the same stuff that Nori's future self endured. Then of course there's the beach DLC thing, but that's been done to death already. It was far just practical use on the battlefield and a quirky yet engaging character that drew me to her so much that she was my wife on the third playthrough through Awakening. While Dark Mages need careful consideration before taking them out into the battle, once the conditions are set right in place, Dark Mages quickly become the best units in the game, and they truly embrace the power of the dark side. So far we've looked at Paladins, Halvard Airs, Mages, Swordmasters, Wyvern Lords and so on. Each one of these classes and their characters represented in the game are unique in their own way, but there is one thing that they all have in common. They're all heroes. Despite the rather generic title, Heroes and Mercenaries win my award for the best class of Fire Emblem. Well, objectively speaking, I find Heroes to be the best classes in terms of balance and gameplay. But of course there's more to a class than just that, so let's take a deeper look. Similar to Paladins, Heroes have next to no weaknesses and are reliable in just about every situation, but these guys do have noticeable strengths as well. Often seen as a mix of both Swordmasters and Generals, since they can take hits and have a good chance of dodging opponents, not to mention they have pretty good strength, making them all around badasses. It also helps that they can wield both swords and axes, making them able to take on the strongest of generals and the fastest of paladins. No matter what the enemy they face, there is nothing a hero can't handle. Similar to Cavaliers, you tend to get a decent number of mercenaries and heroes during the course of the game, and if only one hero can completely rule the map, imagine what 3 heroes can do! There really is nothing bad to talk about when the heroes, but you have to point out one flaw. There is no class they can completely dominate like most other classes do, but even then, there's no other class that can completely destroy hero either. Now when it comes to my favourite hero, I ran into another Tiban situation again because originally I was going to go with Ike, since in Radiant Dawn he is technically a hero class and is pretty much the best unit in the game, not to mention he had 2 games to explore his character. He wields the legendary sword Ragnar, also he's both in Smash Bros. Brawl and Smash Bros. Wii U and 3DS. Also,
I fight for my friends.
Yeah, that too! But looking back, he was technically a Lord in Path of Radiance and might as well be one in Radiant Dawn with his stats. So, sorry Ike, but you don't make the cut. Also,
I also do crack and heroin.
And winners don't use drugs. So instead, I'm going to go with Garrett from Sacred Stones. Being one of the later units in the game, I wasn't too keen on Garrett at first, since I had already established my team by then, and wasn't too sure about switching him with someone else. But it only took one chapter for me to realise just how awesome he was, and he was a must for my team every time I played through Sacred Stones. Despite only being level 10, he was more than capable of taking on the other units who were higher levels than him, and once he became a hero, well, the rest is history. His character was also interesting too. Although being a leader of a mercenary group and having a rough exterior, Garrick is a very kind-hearted person who cares more for his men than himself, and he actually detests violence. He also has an interesting backstory as, after losing a duel to a far more experienced swordsman, he was spared and ever since he's dedicated himself to becoming a better leader and better person. I guess there really isn't much else to say about Hero Class that hasn't already been said. Oh wait, I know!
And they say that a hero can save us. I'm not gonna stand here and wait. I'll hold on to the wings of the eagles. Watch as we all fly away.
Falcon Knights. Good God, Falcon Knights. Probably the most underrated unit, Falcon Knights are some of the most useful and downright awesome classes in the entire game. I honestly don't see why people find them to be useless. Oh my god, Falcon Knights are so weak and they die so easily. Bullshit! Yes, Falcon Knights do have rather low strength and low defenses. But what does that matter when they have a ridiculously high speed stat, allowing them to always get 2 hits in and dodge every attack thrown at them? Also the fact that they have enough resistance to shrug off magic attacks like they were nothing, essentially making them Mage's kryptonite. Did I mention the fact that they can move across the battlefield with ease, being able to kill, capture, and rescue without any fuss, and in certain games they can either wield swords, making axe use a complete non-issue, or even staffs so they can heal your other players. I mean, good lord, these units are beyond incredible! and yet they're still seen as a lower class unit. Sometimes I just don't get people. Also, Pegasus Knights are units that you tend to get early on in the game, allowing you to upgrade to a Falcon Knight as quickly as possible. Not to mention, Sacred Stones gave you 3 Pegasus Knights, all of which were awesome, and Fire Emblem 7 did that too. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be lying if I said that they were perfect, since they do have some flaws. Firstly, if they're shot by an arrow from any bow, no matter what level, they're pretty much dead in an instant. And I don't know about you, but archers tend to be very accurate class, even with the Falcon Knight's high evasion levels. Secondly, though the low strength usually isn't a problem, I wouldn't advise using them against generals since their damage output will be next to nothing, and there is a chance that general could get a lucky hit on you. And finally, the worst thing about Falcon Knights are that until they reach at least level 10, Pegasus Knights do kinda suck. Until they reach a decent level, they're pretty much used for rescuing units and visiting houses across the map, but not getting involved in actual fights for the most part, because they're pretty much guaranteed to die in one hit, maybe 2. When choosing my favourite Pegasus Knight, it should have been a more difficult decision, since all the Pegasus Knights I've used have been so awesome. I mean, there's Marcia, Serene, Cordelia, Vanessa, Tana, and even the 3 Pegasus sisters from Fire Emblem 7. But I knew from the very start who I would pick. Ladies and gentlemen, Sumia. Just like the class she represents, I find Sumia to be the most underappreciated character ever. Everyone complains Sumia is stupid, useless, and just plain annoying. But I have to wholeheartedly disagree. I freaking love Sumia, both in character and in gameplay. First of all, Sumia was by far one of the most useful classes in the game, being easily able to rescue units in danger, and completely owned the desert and mountain maps. Not to mention, when she became a Falcon Knight, her strength and critical hit ratio jumped like crazy. All I had to do was give her a Killer Lance, and she had a 50% critical hit chance, and anyone who's played Fire Emblem knows that pretty much guarantees death for anyone. But it wasn't her use on the battlefield that made me fall in love with her, it was her character that did it for me. Sumia didn't stand out much at first, and did come off as sort of a klutz, but from the moment she rescued Cobb and became a permanent member of the team, I just couldn't stop being infatuated with her. She was the unit that I chose to marry, as the early support conversations she had with my unit were really well done and rather sweet, as it delved into Sumia's need to escape from her problems through reading books and escaping into a fantasy world, and only by supporting each other could we face these problems together and live happily ever after, almost like it was a fairy tale. Hell, I love Sumia so much that on my second playthrough I married her again without hesitation, just to experience the support conversations between us again. And trust me, those support conversations were much better than the ones she had with Kron. Seriously? Fucking pie! Seriously? Even though a lot of people don't like Falcon Knights that much, I still find them to be one of the best units in the series. And with characters like Sumia representing them, I'm not gonna love stopping them anytime soon. Well, we've made it to the number 1 slot. So which class deserves this place? What we need is a class that encompasses everything I've praised the other classes for. Things like versatility, reliability, output towards both enemies and objectives, you get the idea. Oh, if only such a class existed. There aren't enough words on this earth that can describe how amazing generals are, but I'm going to try anyway. Generals have all the bases covered when it comes to making a class of Fire Emblem good. They have the highest defense and health out of all classes, literally making them the tanks of the Fire Emblem series. Their damage output is up there with classes like Warriors and Wyvern Lords that can easily hold down points and block entrances for any enemy trying to flank you. And they're also great for rescuing other units since they can take so much damage and protect the other unit. Hell, in Sacred Stones, generals could wield swords, lances, and axes, making it so no one class could get the better of them. And in Fire Emblem Awakening, they could learn skills like Pervase, cutting the enemy's attack in half and making it almost impossible for them to do even a quarter of their max health. Sweet mother of Naga, these guys are beyond amazing. But that's not to say their pre-upgraded state isn't anything special either. Knights, while being the slowest class in the game, can take huge amounts of punishment and deal strong attacks to the opponent. Just don't expect them to get any ×2 hits anytime soon. While they are susceptible to magic, if you give a knight or general a ranged weapon, the base damage should be more than enough to deal with those guys. And I'm not exactly done yet. In most Fire Emblem games, you should receive 2 knights during your playthrough, sometimes more. And if you make them both generals, you literally get an unstoppable force and an immovable object. Now to choose the best of the best. Which is the greatest general of the Fire Emblem series? For me, it boiled down to either Kajil or Gilliam. Both of these guys are great generals, and were some of the best, if not the best units in their respective games. But while I really like Jill since nothing could face her armor, and she was surprisingly crit heavy and had some good support conversations, Gilliam wins this round, my dear. I knew from the first time I played Sacred Stones that Gilliam was going to be awesome, and boy was I right! Right from the second chapter of the game until the very end, Gilliam could take anything the enemies throw at him, throw it right back in their faces tenfold. More often than not, he was the reason I was able to clear some of the more difficult missions, especially Chapter 6 in that Forsaken Fog. I also loved his support conversations with Serene, showing that despite their duties as knights and the oaths they took, there's nothing that can stand between their friendship and their love. I'm starting to tear up already. This has been CRASHX500, and to me, generals are the best classes in Fire Emblem. I wish you guys a great night, thank you for watching, and I'm so glad they put Robin in Smash Bros. Thank you, Sakurai. Now put him with me, goddammit!